hello to everyone. Thank you for joining us again this afternoon. As Njawa said, I am Simone Delars, and I joined this conversation not only as a researcher, but also someone who has been in the active side of community organizing and accompanying migrant communities. I'm currently completing my PhD, where I'm discussing how local professional integration tools in the city of Toulouse can help immigrant women join the labor force. I've also worked for the past 5 years with the local government in Toulouse, creating and implementing anti-discrimination actions. This afternoon, we have the privilege of hearing from 4 speakers who engage with migrants and refugees at many different levels, be it in social work, research, or community organizing. I hope that our discussion this afternoon will give us insight into each of these essential roles and how we can promote solidarity, not only with migrant and refugee communities, but also amongst different partners in our efforts to provide innovative approaches and practices. For today's discussion, there will be 4 rounds of questions, one of which will be opened up to the audience questions. So please feel free to leave your questions in the chat during our conversation so that we may address them during the 3rd round. For our first round of questions, they will consist of introductory questions for each speaker so that the audience, you all, may familiarize yourselves with their work and their particular context. I'd like to invite the speakers to activate their cameras at this time. Thank you very much. So I would like to first introduce Chali Chama, who is a Senior Protection Assistant for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in Zambia. Chali is a seasoned social worker with a bachelor's degree in social work from the University of Zambia and is currently completing his master's degree in human rights law at the University of Lusaka, focusing on how the Refugee Act of 2017 has been carried out. He has spent a large part of his career in areas related to HIV, AIDS, and gender-based violence, while most recently working with the Congolese refugees in Zambia. Chali, as you have had experience with human and institutional development, what could you tell us about being a social worker while also working within institutional contexts?
Thank you very much, Simone. It's quite a privilege to actually be able to speak at this event. With regards to institutional and capacity development, my work experience with refugees has actually been through, it's a field experience where I'm able to work with and interact with the persons of concerns on a daily basis. And up until 2022 December, we were hosting about 17,000 persons of concern who have since repatriated through the voluntary repatriation exercise, which is one of the durable solutions that I've been actively involved in. And now the population is around 7,000. And I must say I've been part of this process through the overall management and coordination of the activities, including counseling with the persons of concern, creating repatriation cases, as well as generating repatriation forms and ensuring that the repatriation case managements are managed all the way until the persons of concern are returned into the country of origin. With regards to capacity building and capacity strengthening, I've been actively involved in not only conducting best interest assessments and best interest determination for children and unaccompanied minors, but I'm also taking a leading role in building the capacity of the staff as well as the community workers who are engaged in child protection for improved case management for best interest assessment and best interest determination. I'm also taking a leading role in providing support to persons with special needs who engage in various livelihood activities through cash-based intervention strategies, as well as skills training in order to reduce that dependency that is associated with having a special need, and also just to reduce that aspect of them having to depend on aid. So basically, that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Chali. Now I'd like to welcome Christian Coupt. He was a senior specialist in migration policy for the International Labour Organization in Geneva, where she has been part of the team since 2008. Christian, as a political scientist specializing in international relations and labor market integration, what has your most recent research brought you to conclude about the future of diversity, which is also the title of your newest book?
My co-editor of that book, Eric Charret, and I from INAP Quebec, we've been able to mobilize a whole lot of practitioners and scholars from different disciplines and backgrounds to reflect on what could be the most appropriate interventions to make labor markets more inclusive. So this book, The Future of Diversity, focuses on the world of work. And it covers a large variety of issues such as gender equality, migration and ethnicity, racism, violence against LGBTI people, age discrimination. And we have found that actually the tools used in one area to enhance exclusiveness and overcome, enhance inclusiveness and overcome exclusiveness are also often applicable in other areas. So that's one lesson that we've drawn from that book. There are plenty of other lessons. There's for instance, the lessons that to have diversity, the microaggressions and micro and sometimes macroaggressions that are directed as people who can be considered as diverse, those aggressions actually make it that these people are leaving their jobs very often, and so to make the world of work less diverse. So there's this very negative link between what happens to certain workers and how they react and how this prevents a more diverse labor market. There's also the finding that we really have to overcome our biases and stereotypes to arrive at more inclusive labor markets. And very importantly, that inclusiveness is the other side of the coin of diversity. And we can talk a bit more about that book or some of the other findings in that book later on.
Excellent. Thank you much. Thank you very much, Christian. I would like to now welcome Syed Masumi. Syed is currently working as a junior researcher analyst for UNRESD to support the Translating Research into Policy and Practice bond program. Holding a master's degree in sustainable development management from Rheinwald University of Applied Sciences, Syed is well on his way to a rich career in development projects, having already worked in a number of countries such as Afghanistan, India, Bahrain, Vietnam, and Egypt. Syed, thank you for being with us. How could you tell us about the experiences that you've had, both personally and professionally? How have they shaped your understanding of what development means for migrants and refugees?
Thanks, Simone, for the introduction. So first of all, I'd like to start with the personal view. Life brings us with unexpected events. After fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban, my family got evacuated to Germany, and now they are refugees. But at the first impression, it was a happy moment that I met them after 2.5 years, for them also. But then I realized how disappointed they are, because it's a hard time for them to start again from the scratch. They built a life of 30 years of hard work so that they can live a better life after retirement. So the first days, it was really difficult, the first months, but it was social workers that helped them to come up with some challenge of like access to healthcare, access to language course, integration into society. So I'm grateful of social workers, and I congratulate this day on all social workers that are here and those who are advocating for social work. On the other hand, Taliban banned education for girls and women in Afghanistan, and now we, as part of Afghan diaspora, we are working on a development project, which is establishing of an online university for Afghans in exile. With this aim, we are trying to target usually mostly Afghan girls and women based in Afghanistan, Iran, Pakistan, because most of the refugees are situated in these countries, inside Afghanistan, outside. And I did, as part of my master thesis, a feasibility study on this project. And I will be happy to discuss further about the challenge, opportunities, and benefits it's bringing. And that's it from my side. Thanks.
Thank you for that insight, Syed. And last but not least, we have Yulia Hajdeu, who is joining us here. Yulia holds a doctorate in anthropology and is currently a senior researcher and lecturer at the University of Applied Sciences of Western Switzerland. Through her research, Yulia has strived to bring innovative value to the social work of integrating migrants. Yulia, thank you for being with us here today. Yulia, how have you weaved together both your scientific study and also the concrete social work with migrants in Switzerland?
Good day, everybody. Thank you for welcoming me among such brilliant scholars and field workers into this field. Actually, I have to tell you that I'm a social worker in the most important social aid organization in the canton of Geneva. I work in a center for accommodation of the refugees and asylum seekers. And my role is to contribute to the community work and the developmental project going on around the dwelling and accommodation, which is a temporary accommodation, which already looks like a bit contradictory, how to make things work, and neighborhoodship and also integration path, as well as this temporary situation. From a social worker point of view, the diversity is a permanent challenge. From a structural point of view, for example, now we have to deal with the situation that Ukrainian refugees are differently treated compared to the other country refugees. This is only one of the examples. And of course, I think the research brought to me some insights that there are many blind spots of the social policies and migration policies, considering many categories of people. I give just another one, a complicated example, which are Roma in Europe. Roma who are European citizens, but they are most of them poor migrants, challenging the social policies and the migration policies as well in countries like Switzerland and in places like Geneva. So this is my two heads work. So I'm glad to be here with you today.
Thank you very much, Julia. Now we're going to pass on to the second round of our questions. The second round of questions focuses on the practical lessons these speakers have learned in the field or in their line of work, and what it means to really promote diversity in those different contexts. I just want to note for everyone that's in the audience, as we're continuing, if you do have a question that you would like answered in the third round, please use the Q&A application that's at the bottom of your screen. Do not use the chat, please use the Q&A. So, to all our speakers, we had a first introductory round where you each had a moment to speak about your specific context and your activity. Now I'm going to ask some open questions to all four of you, and whoever would like to respond, you can please raise your hand and I'll call upon you. And then we hope to foster a discussion based on those first few answers. So in your different specific contexts, what has been one example of either an effective or ineffective public policy that has facilitated or impeded the integration of migrant communities in your context? Yes, Syed.
Thanks. From the experience that I have witnessed also through my family journey, the effective one will be this integration courses, especially language courses, giving the refugees opportunity to do further education or vocational training so that they can be kind of independent and get into the job market and contribute to the society. But on the other hand, the ineffective one that I realized is in some countries, even in Germany, I know some of the people, they are restricted in having access to job market, or in other countries, they have limited access to healthcare system. When these policies comes on the line, they are pushed further to illegal jobs or black jobs. For sure, they will not pay tax also. So there will not be circulation of economy also. And then if they are getting more to the illegal jobs, then the public view will be against migrants, because they will criticize these migrants came to this country and did this. And then they can also, because negative news can be spread out very quickly, and they can generalize it very quickly in the current era of media. So ineffective will be if they can facilitate their work permit, give them the training, the needed training that will assist them in the long run to be productive contributor of the society, instead of being marginalized and discriminated further. Thanks.
Thank you, Syed. Christiane, I imagine you'd like to respond to that.
Yes. As my context is labor market integration, as you already hinted to, my short answer here would be that I'd say that the integration of migrant and refugee communities is generally facilitated where mainstream labor market policies, such as public employment services and vocational training systems, have been strengthened to include all new arrivals. Sort of, let me explain a little bit better. One can distinguish between targeted integration policies, general introduction courses, for instance, for migrants, which are centralized often, and mainstream policies, that is to say policies or services that exist for all disadvantaged workers and also for job seekers. And actually many countries combine both these approaches. You will have introduction courses, but you will also have hopefully a strengthened mainstream policy portfolio. But I would say, since we're discussing diversity, that in increasingly diverse societies, mainstream approaches have become ever more important, because it's those approaches that do not perpetuate otherness and do not create new boundaries between groups. And existing populations are not left behind when the policies are directed at all workers instead of only at migrants and refugees. I mean, of course, migrant and refugees have some special needs, but I would say importantly, in diverse society, we must not create a sentiment of competition among different groups of people and about long-standing residents and newcomers to a society and economy. The ILO and the Migration Policy Institute have undertaken research in European countries a couple of years ago that very clearly shows how effective the strengthening of public employment services and vocational training systems can be. Although I must admit that mainstreaming policy usually require a huge level of coordination with all kinds of state and non-state actors. And that will have to be overcome, but perhaps we can speak about that later. And also on the mix of targeted integration policies and mainstream policies, I would still like to add that the risk with mainstream policies is that, okay, some country will say, yes, we will do only mainstream policies. And then instead, they will sort of not have the targeted policies anymore, but also not inject extra money into the mainstream policies. And that's then a really no-win situation for everyone. Over to someone else.
Thank you. Does anyone want to respond to the mainstream versus targeted approach? Yes, Julia.
I would like to follow a little bit this idea of competition between national citizens and migrants, but I mean decline on this idea talking about migrants themselves, because in the social aid and follow-up of the migrants, the families have priorities. And as I put it, there are different categories of refugees and asylum seekers. In Switzerland, we have different permits of residence, and considering each of one, the rights are slightly different. So, which means that you have like young people coming from Afghanistan, for example, which are single men people having not the same follow-up in integration compared to some families from example, Afghan also, which is complicated to deal with and to take into consideration in the situations themselves of the field. So the challenge is for us, me and my colleagues, how to develop something which makes sense for the people, considering their also needs, rights, and in the same times projection and projects, you know, which is complicated because we contribute in a way to make them to this competition system too. This is a kind of double bind challenge, yeah.
Absolutely, because it's not because certain migrants have different needs that they should then have different rights. So I can see how that does get difficult. Christian, would you like to respond?
Yes, there is the aspect as well that, you know, there may not be real competition at all, but this perception of competition created by populistic discourses. I guess that's also a very important aspect, and we've heard a lot about our systems, our economic systems, etc. this morning, which also relates to that aspect.
Absolutely. Shelley, I saw that you had your hand up earlier. Did you want to contribute for an example of an effective or ineffective public policy?
Yes, please. And I just wanted to also say something what Julia said with regards to both state and non-state actors coming together to actually assist in this local integration. Because generally in Zambia, we've had a holdback with regards to local integration of refugees. This was mainly because there were reservations to adopting or domesticating the refugee conventions of 1951. So after the adoption of the refugee conventions and the OAU convention, we saw a shift by the government to actually look at ways of locally integrating the refugees in Zambia. Right now, there should be about 25,000 refugees pending a local integration in Zambia. And the uptake has been very slow from the Zambian side. This is mainly due to the fact that there are very limited livelihood opportunities that are available for the refugees once integrated. And also we look at issues of limited infrastructure that is available. There's always been an issue of farming being the main source of livelihood for most of these refugees. So access to that farming land has also been a constant issue. So using state and non-state actors, we're looking at a way in which we can engage local authorities, including chiefs, into giving access to these refugees who are under local integration to have access so that they can be able to farm. Then also we're looking at the government at a policy level. They're looking at ways in which they can introduce other identity documents away from the national passports, such as the alien cards and all that, that can permit the residents to actually be able to get work permits. And they've also looked at extending the validity of the temporary work permits from 3 years to about 10 years, so that they can they don't have to start going around to renew their work permit every 3 years, which seems to be quite short. And just generally, the government of the Republic of Zambia has looked at, has incorporated in their national development plan the shift from looking at local integration as a humanitarian assistance, but to incorporate it into the long-term development approach for the country. Thanks.
Thank you, Shali. I appreciate that insight. I wanted to bring back the question. So many of you, all of you actually, have experience in the academic world, either as researchers or as current graduate students. So I wanted to question how each of you brings in the theoretical perspective to your concrete work. How do you balance these two perspectives, the theoretical and the practical? What does theory look like in practice for some of you? Yulia, you started to speak about that in your introduction, how your theory and your research has allowed you to see what the big loopholes are in the policy, especially when you see it on the ground in your concrete work as a social worker.
I think maybe the perspective is a little bit different when you work in an applied science university, like is a social school, social work school in Geneva, and some other social work schools in Switzerland. And in any case, the idea to bridge practical issues and theoretical learning is from the bottom in the core and in the main values of the school, and for me the purpose is to have good examples to illustrate what the migration theory and authors could say with very concrete and local examples. Our students are currently involved into practical times of learning 2 times in their student career. They have 2 semesters of practical learning in the field themselves, I mean. So it's a kind of permanent challenge for many of teachers in our school. So in this particular case, we have, for example, in the center of refugees where I work, intern student like regularly. They are welcomed and coached by some of my colleagues, and this could bring into the curricula the very concrete issues from the migration and asylum seeking. Where I think it's a challenge is to bring together the civil society with these kind of places, like the center where I work, and the school, like in a innovation of dealing with the community and with the diversity, in order to maybe challenge some rigid part of the policy. This is a point where I would like to work on further.
Yes, it's how does one inform the other? It has to be a circle. It's not top down or bottom up, but really, lateral, informing each other. Christian, in the introduction, you started to talk about what does diversity mean and who gets to decide who is diverse. I think that also theory and what it means, what is diversity, can also be much more informed by the concrete work that comes from social work. But what could you tell us about how that has informed what diversity is today?
Yeah, I think in my line of work, I sort of see it as my responsibility to bring in the theoretical perspective in order to enable dialogue among different stakeholders. People need to know what they are talking about, and dialogue is a very important function in an organization, a tripartite organization such as the ILO, where you have governments, workers, and employers having decision-making power at the same time. So yes, I think because we need to know what people are referring to. We heard this morning, by the way, from Joël Ganapi saying connaître pour reconnaître. So I think that's an important function in my line of work. And in the area of diversity, in that book, I've reflected a little bit about what different understandings of diversity do exist. And one could classify this as the micro, meso, and macro level in terms of how people see diversity. The micro perspective on diversity looks at individuals. So, you know, there's this idea that in many jobs and economic sectors, we tend to have an image of the typical worker. And the typical worker is someone with particular characteristics, such as gender, skin pigmentation, ethnic belonging, age, etc. So we have all these images in our heads. And those who do not resemble that image in a particular occupation, they are much more at risk of having to overcome large obstacles in finding a job in the first place, and then maintaining employment. And they are also the ones that disproportionately face microaggressions that are already mentioned, and violence, more horrible forms of violence in their workplace. Whereas the typical workers, on the other hand, are very often totally unaware of their privileges in the labor market. And I guess, okay, so in this understanding of the micro perspective, diversity relates and connotes with an individual's identity and with the concept of otherness to some extent. Whereas when you look at a more meso perspective, there's often a link with diversity management, and diversity, or having a diverse organization, is considered an objective in itself that has to be achieved. And in this interpretation, diversity brings improved organizational performance, or it can simply be an aim in itself, driven by considerations of equity, and in many contexts, actually both objectives exist. So here you have the idea that staff in businesses or in other organizations are supposed to reflect the composition of society at large. And I would say very often now these days we hear this diversity management in the sense of it should bring a company better profits. And people are very often used with their individual capacities, and sort of there is this mix of private life and private characteristics and professional life. One can discuss to what extent some of this is ethical, and to what extent it is it does make any sense to always have people, for instance, work on something which is related to their characteristics, so that all of these prejudices are perpetuated. But that's still another discussion. So, but there is this diversity management discussion, I would say, at the organizational level, and then there is also a view on diversity which is more at the societal level, and there's a connotation with multitude. So diversity is sometimes regarded as a given, and here we are in the concept of society diversity, and here the question then becomes, what does it mean for the world of work, and that the society is composed of individuals of a variety of backgrounds and characteristics, and perhaps more importantly, and this is the link with the individual category again, what does it mean for the individual worker to be perceived to belong to one or the other category, because very often the self-perception is something else. And here at diversity, at that level, at the macro level, I would say we often tend to connote the concept of diversity with cultural, ethnical, and racial diversity. So there's that. And in truth, these multiple layers of diversity, they are very often interwoven including in analysis. But it is important to understand what people are referring to, and otherwise we will not have much of a meaningful discussion about policies. And here is sort of where, to come back to your initial question, where I see a very, very important link between theory and practice. And there could be other examples. Temporary labor migration and the understanding about what temporary labor migration is, for instance, is very different among employers and workers. But that's a different theme, and let's stay on the diversity one.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have something they'd like to say in reaction or in response?
So with regards to the controversy between theory and practice, I'll try to re-echo what the keynote speaker, Vishanti, said in the morning. Social work practice begins with the self. Us as social workers should understand that it's because of this knowledge that we are acquiring from the theories that are there that will make us have an informed approach to dealing with our persons of concerns and being able to interact with our persons of concerns and be able to actually bring out the best in the persons of concern. So with regards to theory, you find there are varying theories that can be applicable in very different contexts. For instance, you can look at the systems theory, which is something that I resonate to almost on a daily basis when dealing with the persons of concern. Mostly when they come into our settlement through our transit camp, they have no system whatsoever. They are very limited or unstable systems around them because they don't have family. The only connection they have is the humanitarian agencies that are offering the cold relief items once they are settled into our settlement. So how best are we going to fuse them into our system? One of the major challenges is language, mostly, as Syed mentioned. One of the biggest challenges is language. If you look at the refugee population that we have in Mantapala, coming from the Democratic Republic of Congo, which mainly has Swahili and French, which is directly opposite to Zambia, which mainly has English and Bemba, that already creates a barrier. So how are we going to fuse them into our system of the refugee settlement so that they can be able to live, and it being a settlement, to live in tandem with the host community which speaks Bemba. So we've deliberately put up measures that through the refugee leaders and translators who are able to speak Bemba to welcome these new arrivals, teach them the basics of the languages that are mainly spoken, which in this instance is Bemba, and this will help them to deliberately, these are deliberate measures that have been set up to help these refugees adjust. Because as a social worker on my desk, I'm basically irrelevant if someone comes to me speaking Swahili or French, which I may not have an idea about. Then how best am I going to help this person to overcome their physical or mental needs? How is this person going to interact with them, to have social connections with the host communities and others? How is he going to have access to employment if he cannot speak that language? So these are some of the challenges that are there with theory and practice. And I think the onus is up to us as social workers to let these problems begin with us. You understand the problem and have a solution-centered approach in our mind as we are dealing with our persons of concern. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's one thing to make it possible for migrants to socially integrate, but also professionally integrate so that they're able to have financial means and to be independent, and also just to have access, independent in the sense of being able to access different services by speaking the language that's spoken in that community. I appreciated hearing about the ineffective as well as the effective public policy that you have all observed, and how that has either facilitated or impeded the integration of the migrant communities in your different contexts. We are going to move on to our final round of questions as we're waiting for some more questions to come in, just to make sure that we have enough time. And so leading into what we've just seen, so the things that have been positive and things that have been frustrating or maybe ineffective, now we're moving towards the final round, which is how do we move forward through joint social action? So how do we move forward in all these different contexts and all these different partnerships that you've formed? Because As you well know, no one entity can function completely alone. Social workers can't function without the state can't function without the social workers. Community organizing that happens in our different contexts also is a key point, a key structure in these different efforts. So our final round of questions touches on today's title, which is Respecting Diversity Through Joint Social Action. Our speakers this morning gave many different images of how we can be bound together to be stronger together. There was the image of the arrows, there was the image of the quilt and the thread. So I'd like to take this final round to speak about what your experiences have been in working in partnerships and what did the partnerships look like when they were successful. So do any of you have examples first of a partnership that you have either observed as a researcher or as a frontline actor participated in that was productive? What did that look like? What was the project? Yes, Syed, start us off.
Thanks, Simone. So as I mentioned in the first round of question about the project of Afghanistan Online University, during the feasibility study that I did as part of my research, so I mapped out the different stakeholders and partners that can contribute, because this university, for sure, it's for Afghans, especially for girls, but it also welcomes foreigners who are interested in the society and culture of Afghanistan to get integrated into this topic. And on the other hand, giving the Afghan the freedom for the science and research to get connected with foreigners, with young people from around the world. And that's really a tangible thing if it happens. So in this feasibility study, because the idea is to establish it as a private university within Germany, so we looked into different private university and public universities inside Germany for joint program degrees, for scholarships, for like from German Academic Exchange Center, they can provide a scholarship, or Aga Khan, which was very active in Afghanistan. They could assist students in onboarding sessions with their English language. And also there's Afghanistan Chamber of Commerce in Afghanistan as a private sector. They can come in and give the students inside Afghanistan some thesis projects, some internships, introduce them with different channels. So if you look like, if you want to make diversify the study programs or bring foreigners and Afghans together for one study program, it can give kind of mutual image of the country and Afghans to the world. And I found that quite beneficial. And that's the example that I wanted to reflect upon. Thanks.
Thank you. Yulia, would you like to respond?
Yes, I would like to give also some example of good practices in idea to build up partnerships and challenge a little bit this status quo of the migration policies and bureaucratical functioning of the asylum. First of all, I think our jobs themselves in this kind of field, centre d'hébergement collectif, centers for accommodations for refugees, in building community with residents, which means all kind of migrants who are there, including older ones who are like limit of the homelessness people. So we try to build things around projects, common projects and common goods also with residents, much more than with different kind of refugees. We try to put in place, for example, a garden with common places, not only individual small spots, how to think together about life in a way, with musical stuff, with getting abroad, walking, taking time to maybe drink coffees or teas and sharing as much as possible. Google Translation, it's helping when we don't have common languages. it can work for simple things, and it could be interesting to, in a way, overcome the language barrier. I would like to say this to Charlie, but yeah. It's about also this intention to bring people together and build something which overcome the individuals, the family logic, or the single depression and so on. So I think, as I put it first, NGOs could be very helpful, like resource people inside these places, residents themselves, for example, being able to animate a football session or a basketball session. These are things that in traditional social work is coming from the side of animation socioculturelle. So we believe that it could be a place for these kind of good practices.
Okay. And yeah. Just to kind of tie into that, what are the two elements that really made these partnerships productive? What are two elements that help facilitate these partnerships? This is for everyone.
First of all, sorry to just unchain a little bit. I think it's a good knowledge of the network around. This could be a first thing that it makes things develop. Think in order, I mean, conceptualize the whole thing in order to overcome the idea of loisir as a place for integration, actually. And I mean, not only language skills and professional projects are contributed to integration, but also this kind of small inputs which
that build personhood.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Did someone want to react or add on to that? Christian, yes?
Yes, Julia's intervention very much made me think of something labor market oriented again. But you know, when Julia, when you spoke about sort of the intention to bring people together, I think that's very important. And the example this made me think of is an example that I've heard at an international conference in Gothenburg in Sweden. The city of Gothenburg ran or is still running a program that I found extremely fascinating, which is called Let's Color Gothenburg. And here in that program, you put together unemployed youth from particularly disadvantaged neighborhoods. And the aim of the program is twofold. It's to get people into employment, to get them into training, while at the same time uniting and beautifying the city. And here is sort of the participating youth and are giving training to become professional painters. So there's this very hands-on idea of you learn a profession, and all of that is organized between the municipality and the professional association, that is to say between state sort of and employers. And as part of the tasks that the youth get in their training is to reinvigorate Gothenburg with paint and colors, and you actually have beautiful areas now within the city. So you have these both these aspects, and what is even more, it's very, very intentional, and here coming back to the intention to bring people together, that the teams that learn together are very diverse. You have long-standing Gothenburgers, newly arrived people, nationalists, foreigners, men, women, who all learn together how to become a professional painter under the instruction of someone from that profession. and they also learn about each other at the same time. And they do this with the aim of also helping the whole city to become more beautiful. I think that's a really lovely example of a labor market intervention where you have this intent to bring people together, and which has very visible outcomes.
Yes.
Everyone.
Multifaceted for sure. Multifaceted for sure. Shali, did you want to add something as we wrap up this question?
Yeah, so I just wanted to also give an example of partnership. UNHCR has interagency coordination at the center of its intervention. So more often than once, we have social workers from the interagency coordinating committee collaborate. And since we're talking about diversity, the example that comes to mind mostly is when we were conducting the retains intention survey, which is part of the overall durable solutions strategy. We had to employ the gender, age, and diversity approach in conducting this retains intention survey, which fed into the durable solution for voluntary repatriation. And we saw it's just a vital role. It's a way of ensuring that refugees take part or have a role in shaping their own future with regards to their returning to their country of origin. So it's also a way in which implementing partners can integrate concerns and requirements of the potential returnees based on their age, gender, and diversity into their overall programming for the voluntary repatriation. Then with regards to the elements that I think are important in my experience, I look at them from an approach of KPIs, but not key performance indicators, but more like keeping the partners informed, keeping them inspired, keeping them involved, and then also keeping them interested. So basically, that is what I believe those are key elements that are related to having an effective partnership.
Thank you. Yeah, creating that the people that are concerned by this project are partners, but then also keeping everyone informed. And that goes back, Christian, what you were saying about the definition of diversity. Are we all on the same page about our objective here? Are we all going in with the same intention as we're trying to move this partnership forward? So we are coming to the end of our roundtable. Unfortunately, before we didn't have any questions, but now I see people are no longer shy and they're asking their questions. So we're going to have time to ask one question. And I think this one sums up, could be nice for each one of you to give your final thoughts on social work and joint social work specifically. So here is a question. I was wondering if any of the speakers could give their reflections regarding the different professional names, so the titles, which are sometimes given to social workers in the context of migration. For example, protection officer, vulnerability assessor, etc. So for me, this question is getting at, what is your role in all of this? What is the role of social work in accompanying migrants and refugees and their integration? So if you'd like to answer that question, give him your final thoughts, give the floor to each one of you before we wrap up.
So I can start?
Yes, please, Shali.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so with regards to this, I think titles really in inverted commas may not really have bearing on our professional practice as social workers per se, because you are like protection assistant, protection officer, case worker, case manager, all that feeds into our professional practice and having a human rights centered approach into our delivery of our work. That is where all these different professional names are given to social workers, kind of fitting into the migration or forcibly displaced persons space. So we have to look at beyond the title, what are you required to do as a social worker on that desk, as a vulnerability assessor, as a case manager, as a protection officer, or as a social worker? What are your requirements as you're doing your job? Are you putting the needs of the client first? What approach are you using? Depending on the space that you are in, are you putting the human rights as the first option prior to anything else? I think that in a nutshell is what really speaks into all the different professional titles that are related to social workers, because the names are endless. The professional titles are endless, but the actual context is what are we doing as social workers to help this forcibly displaced person? Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shale. Thank you for that. Would anyone like to respond to that?
Actually, it's not a response. I totally agree with Charlie about the importance of the content and the ethical issues of it, because all of us, we know that in the fieldwork situation, you have oftenly so much bureaucracy, so much rules to respect, like fire and security going first of all, more important than the community issues and the developmental aspects and so on. So how we deal with all of this, I think it's something which has to be set up like every week, like every day. And this reflexivity of the social worker is, I think, for all of us, important as a kind of algorithm of the work itself. And I don't think there is a kind of recipe or unique answer about how to do it, but it's a kind of challenge to not to forget that it has to be done for every one of us.
And continuously, like you said.
Yes, a work in progress and a continuous
right.
learning also.
It is. And the reflexivity, I like that you mentioned that. I think these are complex situations, and so they deserve complex responses. There's no one way to do it. It's not a one size fits all. It's something that each of our contexts has to look at, and what does it mean, and what is the intention that we are bringing into our specific context. Christian and Syed, do you have anything that you would like to say before we wrap up?
Just adds on Shirley. Those were quite nice points. Just from my point of view, because social worker can have a variety of positioning, but mostly they have case management. They can do advocacy for legal aspect, policy development. They can do research, evaluation. But in terms of ethical, it's better to consider when you're doing research. It's better to do fact checking, because there are a lot of biased research also. So it's better to think quite wisely when you're doing research, have self-confidence, because once you're self-confident, you can face the challenge, the issue better. It's better to have understanding of the person's cultural background. That will help you. So I think these all points can help that social workers, especially those who are new graduated, to face the issue, the problem with confidence and move forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Syed. Christian, any final words?
I couldn't agree more with what the colleagues have said here before. I would simply like to end with a sort of a word of caution that yes, it doesn't matter how we call a social worker, and I've only met very super reactive, as you say, responsive people, but where the state can intervene is really not to overburden these people, these workers, with all that is misfunctioning in our societies, and actually give them time and also recognize their work. I guess that's a very important idea, in particular, if we're talking about what I said earlier, mainstreaming policies. Then you have to have, we know from research about labor market integration that it works best if people get early contacts with caseworkers, for instance. But very often the capacity is not there. And in some states, the idea is, okay, we can only deal with long-term unemployed. And of course, so newcomers fall down the the case there. There are all these issues, and my plea would here be, especially on a day where we celebrate social workers, that we don't put the entire burden of the world on the shoulders of social workers, and realize how much they do, and under whatever hats they are working, and really support them more as a society, and recognize what they are doing and how important it is, this line of work for our societies.
Absolutely. There does need to be some definition of what social workers are doing, and not that they're just taking on all of the misery of the world and fixing everything. There needs to be intentionality in that, and what they're supposed to be taking care of, and also the support that they need to be able to carry that out. I think that so how we support social workers could be a whole other day. We could have a whole other roundtable to discuss that, how we can better accompany those people that are doing such important work in our society. So I apologize, but we are going to have to wrap up this very riveting conversation. I apologize to our audience that we did not have more time. For more questions, you can reach out if you'd like to continue the discussion. And we wish you all a very nice rest of your afternoon. Thank you to all the team members that made today possible. Thank you to our speakers. And we wish you all a nice rest of your afternoon. Thank you.